Winston Churchill, one of the most iconic leaders of World War II. But what if I told you that his real training ground wasn't in the war rooms of London, but deep in the battlefields of South Africa? That's right. Churchill's time in the Boer War shaped his military mind in ways most people have no clue about. His daring escape from a Boer prison, the guerrilla tactics he witnessed, the psychological warfare he learned, it all played a role in how he commanded Britain's forces decades later. Stick around, because once you hear this, you'll never see Churchill the same way again. Before Winston Churchill became Britain's most famous wartime prime minister, he was a young war correspondent, desperate to make a name for himself. The year was 1899, and the British Empire was locked in a brutal conflict against a small, scrappy group of Boer fighters in South Africa. Churchill was there to report on the war, but he ended up living it, captured by the Boers, imprisoned. Then, in a move straight out of an action movie, he pulled off one of the most daring escapes in history. But it wasn't just about survival. Churchill absorbed every lesson from that war. Lessons that would come back in full force when Hitler came knocking. The Boer War wasn't like the grand European battles of the Napoleonic era. It was something different, messy, unpredictable, and dominated by guerrilla warfare. The Boers weren't fighting in neat, organized rows. They were ambushing, using the terrain, striking supply lines. And for a massive empire like Britain, this was a nightmare. Churchill saw it firsthand, and it changed the way he thought about war forever. But the biggest lesson? That wars weren't just about firepower. They were about strategy, deception, and resilience. Churchill's capture and escape. In 1899, Churchill was traveling on an armored train when it was ambushed by Boer forces. He was captured and sent to a POW camp. But instead of resigning to his fate, he planned one of the most famous escapes in history, hopping a train, hiding in a coal mine, and trekking through enemy territory to freedom. This moment solidified Churchill's belief in taking bold, decisive action, even in the face of overwhelming odds. What he learned from the Boers, unlike the British, the Boers fought in small, highly mobile units using hit-and-run tactics to outmaneuver a much larger enemy. Churchill saw how effective this was, and realized that traditional European warfare was outdated. The Boers, with their deep knowledge of the terrain, their use of decentralized command, and their ability to strike and disappear, showcased a style of fighting that would become common in 20th century wars. How it shaped his World War II strategy. Fast forward to the 1940s, and Churchill's understanding of guerrilla warfare played a key role in how he approached resistance movements in Nazi-occupied Europe. He supported sabotage missions, espionage, and unconventional warfare tactics that mirrored what he had seen in South Africa. The formation of the Special Operations Executive, which trained resistance fighters and spies, had direct echoes of the Boer commandos' tactics. Psychological warfare. Churchill also learned how propaganda and morale could win wars. In the Boer War, British forces used concentration camps and scorched earth tactics, strategies that horrified the world. Churchill saw the power of narrative, which he later weaponized against Hitler, using speeches, radio broadcasts, and psychological tactics to keep Britain's spirit unbroken. His famous wartime speeches, "We shall fight on the beaches and never surrender," weren't just words. They were weapons of war, crafted to rally a nation. The impact of mobility and logistics. The Boers exposed a critical weakness in the British Army, over-reliance on supply lines and slow-moving formations. Churchill saw firsthand how mobility could be more powerful than sheer numbers. In World War II, this understanding influenced his support for fast-moving tank divisions, airborne forces, and elite commando units that could strike quickly and disrupt enemy operations. Churchill's role in counterinsurgency. Decades later, Churchill was involved in conflicts in the Middle East, including the Arab Revolt and Malayan Emergency. His experience in South Africa had taught him how hard it was to suppress determined insurgents, which shaped British counterinsurgency policies. While controversial, these experiences informed his later decisions on handling colonial uprisings and asymmetric warfare. D-Day and the influence of unconventional warfare. Churchill's advocacy for deception campaigns in World War II, like Operation Fortitude, which tricked the Germans into believing the D-Day invasion would happen elsewhere, can be linked to lessons from the Boer War. The ability to mislead an opponent, to use feints and distractions, was something he had seen the Boers do effectively against the British decades earlier. The turning point came when Churchill, now Britain's wartime leader, faced the Nazi threat. He knew that direct confrontation wasn't always the answer. Sometimes the key to victory was outmaneuvering the enemy, just like the Boers had done to the British decades earlier. His support for resistance movements in France, the use of commandos, and even the strategy behind D-Day, all had echoes of what he had learned in South Africa. Winston Churchill wasn't just a great orator. He was a strategist forged in the fires of unconventional warfare. The Boer War showed him that wars aren't just won with brute force, but with intelligence, adaptability, and psychological strength. Without that experience, would he have been the same leader in World War II? Probably not. And that's the untold story of how a young war correspondent in South Africa became the man who stood against Hitler. If you found this fascinating, you won't want to miss our next video. Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned.